pas. Et on recrute des data scientists actuellement, donc n'hésitez pas à venir me parler ou à venir parler à Ping Chang ici présent si vous êtes intéressé. Merci. Et tout de suite, on va commencer avec Thomas. Ouais. Ah. Je sais pas. Alors, 2 petites minutes. Est-ce qu'on entend à la vidéo sans micro sinon? Je sais pas où sont les micros. Est-ce qu'il y a de l'écho? Ah oui. D'accord. 1, 2, 1, 2. Ça va mieux là? Ouais? Est-ce que c'est mieux? Un, deux, 1, 2. Est-ce que c'est mieux? Alors, Doctrine est un moteur de recherche. Go? Ok, ça marche. Merci.
Cool. Seems to be working. So thank you everybody for coming to this presentation. We're going to talk about how we do job to candidate matching here at Job Teaser. I will talk about convolutional neural networks and triplet loss. So this is the small teaser, but before that, quick history of what Job Teaser is and what we do at Job Teaser. So the company has been founded almost 10 years ago. And we started with just videos about companies, videos to present what it is to work at a company. So that was the first product, and it has changed quite a bit since. In 2013, we launched what we call the Career Center, which is now our main product. So the Career Center is basically a white label website that we integrate into universities and schools website. So if you are a student, for example, you can go at your university website and you get a Job Teaser. It's the color of your school, basically. And what you find there is job ads and a lot of advice about a career. So we work hand in hand with the career services in universities. So the first one has been launched in 2013. And since then, we have a lot of career centers, more than 600 schools across Europe, where we can broadcast jobs. So the idea is we get an audience of all the students of all the universities and schools where we are present, and we get paid by the companies to post jobs in these career centers. So we've just raised now 50 million euros not long ago to our, I'd say, next product, which is not only job ads, but also more generally to help students find their dream job. So this is ambitious. Being proposed some jobs is one element, but the other ones are simple career guidance tools. So for instance, some psychometric tools to help you discover what you want to do in life. What are your soft skills? What do you dislike? What kind of jobs you want, basically. So this is all the tools we are developing right now on top of the job board product we have. So about Job Teaser ecosystem, our product is based on 3 main pillars. There are students, there are companies, and there are schools. And the 3 of them are highly integrated. Of course, the schools offer us an audience, offer us access to the students. So we work hand in hand with all the three pillars. So we have 2.5, maybe more than that now, we'll say it a bit old, million students and graduates that are in all the schools we are present. There are more than 600 career center services across Europe in 10 countries and 17,000 clients. Clients means companies. So the clients post job offers in the career centers, which are in the schools, and then the students can access those jobs. So our mission is really to help anybody to find his or her dream job through a lot of products, and among these products is data science, but not only. So about our team, we are more than 300 people. So we're growing quite fast. Among those 300 people, 150 people are abroad. Not abroad, but international teams, and part of these are abroad for university, operations, and sales. And the tech team is about 90 people. So what are the data science challenges we have? And we will detail one of them. So first challenge is, what I will talk just after that, is job candidate matching. So we have candidates or applicants or students, people searching for a job. And we want to do 2 things. First one is job recommendation. Job recommendation is you want to push to suggest jobs to students that might be relevant for them. Okay, this is a standard. And second one is candidate sourcing. So this the exact opposite operation is the company is posting a job ad, and you want to give to the company some relevant resumes of students that might be a good fit for the position. So we have both features. Okay, second problem is a bit different. Is everything related to keyword extraction and classification. So you can think of, for example, we want to, in a job offer, we want to detect the type of contract, the length of the contract, the type of job, well, the skills, and a lot of other things. Same for the resume. So this is everything that's related to extracting keywords. This can be either named entity recognition in terms of NLP or just classification. So yeah, in terms of features, this amounts to, for example, auto-completion. When you fill up your profile, you want to have auto-completion for skills, for example, or you want to suggest automatically some relevant keywords or things. Yeah. And the third challenge we have is everything related to guidance. So I told you about the guidance tools we are developing. For instance, one of them is, I could call it a Tinder of jobs. So you have a list of roughly 200 jobs. So not job ads, but just jobs, like data scientist is a job. And the student wants to discover what he or her wants to do in his life. So to that you have cards. One card is a job, and you swipe left or right. And then you can, on the card, you have a lot of information, and you want to discover at the end of the day, have the cars you liked are the cars you want to, the job you might be interested in. And the machine learning here is in a bandit problem, reinforcement learning here. So you want to find quite quickly relevant cards, relevant jobs for the student, but you don't want to push the student too hard into what he has answered in the 3 or 4 first cards, for example. So it's a trade-off between exploration and exploitation. So this is one example. Another example is people recommendation. So we are building right now a kind of social network feature for alumni and students to help them share some tips about jobs or simply job ads. All right. So let's talk about job candidate matching, which is one of the challenges. So what we want to do here is embed a job and a candidate in a space. So I explain why you want to do that, but basically what we will work with for a job is the job description, so the text of the job ad, and for the candidate is the resume, so the text of the resume. So this is why we are doing NLP, and this is why we are here tonight. And so we have the text of the job ad, the text of the resume, and we'd like to compute a similarity score between the two, matching score. And one way of doing it, it's not the only one, of course, is to embed both job and the candidate in a Euclidean space. So you get a vector for a job and a vector for a student. And then you just have to compare the two to compute the Euclidean distance between the two, and you get the answer, right? And the whole challenge of it is to find a nice embedding such that when you compute the Euclidean distance after it, you get something meaningful in terms of skills, of type of job, of location, of everything that you can think of that characterizes a job. So this is why we want to do it. For the first use case, of course, is job recommendation. So job recommendation, how does it work? You have job ads. Yeah, thank you. You have job ads here. You embed the job ad in you embed the job ad in the space, so you get the vectors for the job ads. You do the same for the resume. And then this you can do it asynchronously. So you can do it upfront as soon as you enroll a new student or as soon as you get a new offer, a new job ad. So this you can store in the database. And then after that, you just have when a new student wants to have a recommendation. So he arrives, I don't know, let's say on the profile page. You just have to compute approximate k-nearest neighbors. So the prediction, so the whole, I'd say, intelligent stuff, clever stuff, maybe, are here in the embedding. And this is just a simple k-nearest neighbor algorithm. So you have the student ID and you get the k jobs that are most similar, the closest ones in the space to the student. So yeah, in practice, we do this for either a recommendation on the website or an email alert, for example, that we send with jobs. So we can do the same for candidate sourcing. It's exactly the same. I've just swapped student and job ads. You input a job ad and you get student IDs. So this is for candidate sourcing, for a company to find the best students or graduates. And last use case is offer to offer. So you get a job offer, a job ad, and you want to have the k most similar jobs to this job. So this is for a feature like you like these jobs, maybe you will like this other one. So you have still the same steps, pre-computation here and prediction. Is it clear? So how do we do it? Well, the core of it is a convolutional neural network. It's not deep learning. I'm sorry, there's only one layer. It's a shallow learning. in a way. So the first thing, which is maybe one, which is very important actually here, is the word embedding, of course. So to represent our resume and to represent the text of the job ad. So yeah, when I say a document, it can be either a resume or a job ad. It's exactly the same structure. So you have the text here. Each of those is a word, and this word is a fast text vector. So we used fast text. We could have used other, but fast text works fine. And this fast text is a domain-specific fast text, meaning just we have retrained it on our own data, on the whole corpus. Why? Because the meaning of the words used in recruitment are a bit specific, and it didn't work at all with generic fast text. You've got specific words, abbreviation, or others. So we have a CV, let's say, a resume or a job ad represented by a sequence of word vectors. Each, so depending on the length of the document. So this is what we have here. L is the number of words in the document. And then we make it flow through a 1D convolution. So this is a one-layer convolutional network, let's say. What works best, I'd say, we tried a lot of parameters, and what works best is 246 filters. Have an idea in one layer. So very kind of deep, wide but not deep layer. Each of the filters is of length 4. So what this CNN does is basically looking for all 4 grams in the text and trying to, works like a feature detector, trying to find the most meaningful 4 grams in the text, in the resume and in the job ad to match both. And each of the filters, we can say, acts as a feature detector. Okay, after that, we use the rectified linear unit for after the convolution. So what this does, why do we use this? Well, it's pretty standard, first reason. And second one, it has this nice flat line here. And this nice flat line means some of the 246 filters will be discarded. So will be exactly 0. And this is what we want. We want the representation to be sparse, and we want to allow the filters to be zeroed. And so if the output of this is negative, this learns to be 0. This is 0. This is pretty useful in practice because even if you have 246, in most of the cases, not all are used. Between maybe 20 or to 150 or 200 are used in practice. And then we apply a maximum. So this means for each filter, we go through the whole text and we take the maximum. So the 4 gram, the quadrigram that outputs the highest value for the filter. Okay. So we can say it's a pretty standard CNN with 1 layer. And last thing, we do a fully connected layer. We let it flow through a fully connected layer to map this whole thing to an embedding of fixed sides, size 80 here. And this is our final embedding, right? Okay, so we do this for the resume text, and we do this for the job ad. And now how do we learn this? How do we learn this? With this Siamese network. What does Siamese mean? It just means that there are shared weights between 3 versions of the same thing that I showed to you. So we train it with triplets. So we have a triplet with 3 items. First item is a resume, so the resume of a student. Second item of the triplet is a positive offer, a positive job ad. So what I call a positive job ad is learned on historical data. It's a job ad that the user, the graduate or the student actually applied to. It's called a positive job ad. So we have this, and then we have a negative job ad. So I'll go back later to how I choose this negative job ad, but this is basically a job ad that the student or the graduate did not apply to. And we let them flow through the same architecture. So this means there are shared weights. This is the same network. There's only one network. So we do the same for so we call it the anchor. The anchor is the reference text, which is the resume here. And these are the positive and negative job ads. We have these embeddings for the jobs and for the resume. And we compute distances. So this is triplet loss. So this is what I will explain is triplet loss. We compute the distance between the positive and the anchor embedding, which gives us this distance, just Euclidean distance. We do the same for the distance between anchor resume and the negative job ad. And of course, what do we want? We want, this is the triplet loss objective. We want to have this distance smaller than this plus a margin. M is the margin. So why so? Well, the objective is that similar resumes and similar offers are embedded close to each other in the embedding space. And why the margin? Because we want them to be very close, like closer than a specific margin. Okay, so this is the triplet loss schema from the original FaceNet paper. So the loss is explained is like this. I will not detail too much how it works, of course, but basically, this is the maximum over 0 and this quantity. So when we are in this case, so this is a bad case because the negative here is closer to the anchor than the positive. So we don't want this. So in this case, this distance here, the AP is big, this one is small, and this thing is big. In that case, this is what we want. This is the objective. The positive has been pushed towards the anchor. What we have is DAP is this distance is small, smaller than this plus a margin. This gets negative, and we take the maximum, so this gets 0, and the loss is 0. So we do not incur any loss in this case. This is a good case, and this is a bad case. Okay, fine. Okay, so now I've skipped a thing. Is the negative job ad. So I said I have the positive offer, the anchor, and the negative job ad. So the whole question and across literature is what people call triplet mining. Triplet mining is how I choose the negative. And in fact, it matters a lot, as some of you must know. So this nice picture shows us how it works. Here we've got the anchor. So the anchor is, remember, the resume. Here we've got a positive offer, a positive job ad. This is the job that the student actually applied to. And these are different places where we can put the negative, so the third item of the triplet. So if the third item is here in easy negatives, so it's far away from the positive, this is what we call, that people call, it's not me, an easy negative. Why easy? Because it's already kind of well classified. It's already what we want. The negative is far away and the positive is close, okay? This, between the positive and positive plus the margin is what we call semi-hard. Why semi-hard? Because, okay, they are well classified, they are close, they are far enough, but they are not as far as we want to. So we want them to be in this part, and they're a bit too close. They are not kind of in the margin, okay? So we don't really want this. And if the negative is here, this is the hard negative, which is really a bad case, meaning we predict the exact opposite of what we want. The negative should be far, and it's very close. It's closer even than the positive. So this is a bad prediction, okay? So intuitively, the semi-hard negatives and the hard negatives carry a lot more information than the easy negatives do. Why? Because they are easy, the easy negatives. The model has already learned to classify them well, to match them well. So what we want is to choose only the semi-hard negatives and hard negatives. And this is what people do in practice. And the other thing is those triplets, we don't really want to build them upfront. Because if we build a list of triplets upfront, this thing is only true at the beginning. This is the prediction by my done by my basic model, my first model. And then when I update, when I do, let's say, stochastic gradient descent, Adam or whatever, optimization, I want the triplets to be sampled according to my current version of the model. I want really the hardest triplets to predict at time t when I am doing learning. So what I do is online triplet mining. Okay, so what this means is, so the procedure is at each learning step, I sample a batch, but I sample only a batch of pairs and not triplets. I take pairs of anchor resumes and positive job ads. So this comes from my database of tracking, historical tracking. I got these pairs and I will build fake negatives. So this will be based on the assumption that a random job ad is a negative. If I take, for example, your resume, and I assign you to a random, I take a random job ad in my whole database, I can assume that it's a negative, that you will not apply to it. So this has two nice properties. It has two nice properties. First nice property is it works. It works because it's a negative, so it's a hard negative. I mean, I can choose a hard negative. But the other one is I don't have to embed the negatives. I don't know if it's clear, but the negatives are actually random positives. So if I take, so this is one guy, this guy has applied to this job. And now if I take a random one and put it here, this gives a negative for the first guy. Okay? This is what I do. I shuffle the positives to turn them into negatives. And this spares me 1/3 of computational power, of course. And now, as I said before, what I do is I take a distance matrix between all resumes in this batch and all job ads, and I take only the semi-hard and hard ones, hard triplets. So I compute for each triplet, I sort them by the loss, and I take the one that are the hardest. Okay, a word about the results of this technique. So the metric I used here is ROC, area under ROC curve, reservoir operational curve. On unseen, of course, validation, unseen jobs and unseen resumes. So I will compare to maybe not that fair baseline, but an easy baseline, I say. I've chosen two baselines. The first thing we would like maybe to try is the average fast text of all words in a CV and all words in a job ad. So you take all words, you take a fast text, you do the average, and then the cosine similarity between the job ad and the resume. This gives you, as expected, a pretty bad result because there are a lot of uninformational words in those documents, and the documents are pretty long. Second baseline is title resume intersection. That works surprisingly well. I mean, better than the previous one. This is just the number of words from the title of the job ad that are found in the resume. So if there is a data scientist or machine learning engineer in the job title, and you can find it in resume, it's a pretty good indicator of match. And then finally, our model, which achieved this 0.89, which is not that bad. Could be improved, of course, but what's also nice is if you look at some results, some details. So I've taken the job teaser data scientist job ad, and this is the top 11 nearest neighbors. So this is offer to offer, right? So this is the closest offers to ours. And you see it works pretty well. But of course, you can see one thing, which is what? There's a bias in the company. There's our clients, and not all the whole market. There's a data analyst here. There's a data science engineer here. Maybe some others. So what does this mean? This means our data, I mean, our model can be only as good as the data, of course, and the data is data of applicants, of applications. So this probably shows that people that are actually data analysts in their resume, they apply to data scientist positions. And this is the biggest bias in this algorithm, especially if you want to use it for candidate sourcing. But also you can see that it captures some pretty nice patterns like this intelligent processing of some problems in some industrial things, I don't know, which is not real data. It's not simple to label as data scientist. It captures also this thing. Okay, to conclude, let's discuss quickly what's nice about this model. There is no cold start problem. So you don't have to have history about the user or about the job ad to use it. Once it's learned, it works out of the box. Architecture, I've already told you about for real-time prediction. It also captures some subtle patterns, as I just emphasized, but similarity is not all. You still want to, for example, match the job type. If you are looking for an internship, you want to show only internships. So some of those logic has still, of course, to be encoded manually or in a separate algorithms. This similarity stuff does not handle it. It mixes up internships with full-time positions, for instance. Second one is the bias towards applicants' preferences I just told you about. So you don't show what people are good at, but just where they apply. And last one is not very important, but still the resume job heterogeneity. This means when you look at embeddings, actually resume embeddings and offer embeddings are quite separated. They are not very entangled. They are not mixed up. So okay, it works. The closest offer to a resume and the closest resume to an offer is meaningful, but they are not very close in the space. They're not mixed up. They're a bit separated, not always. So this is probably something we want to improve. Okay, I will skip the references because we are a bit late, but everything I told you about is here. I will just emphasize two things. First one is understanding convolutional neural networks for text classification. This is guys trying to understand what exactly the CNN filters learn. What they learn, the 4-gram, the trigrams, and which of them are meaningful, which of them are not. And explainability is very, very important for us at JobTeaser because we want to explain why we do a particular prediction. And last one is Guild AI. It's a very nice tool to do a reproducible machine learning to manage runs. And well, it's pretty new, it's still beta, but I encourage you to try it. We use it. It allows you to keep track of the data, end of the code, end of everything you use for a run. And very simply with command line, it's a minimal tool to keep track of what you're doing, basically. And future work, and we conclude. Multiple languages. All the languages are mixed up. You have 9 languages. I've only used 2 for this example, French and English. But probably we want to do something more clever about multilingual stuff. However, it works when it's reasonably balanced. It works with French and English, but it's probably suboptimal. Explainability. I said it. Fairness. We reproduce the biases, the biases of people that apply and the biases of recruiters that might be discriminating candidates. And we will reproduce it if we don't do something specific about it. And we will do something specific about it. And last one is, of course, we'll try BERT and nice things for this. This is our team, and we are hiring a machine learning engineer especially. I will be happy to take maybe one question. Yeah? Questions? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Non, vas-y. Non, mais vas-y, passe le micro. Tu veux passer le micro peut-être? Enfin, pardon.
Okay, so you mentioned the Siamese network shares the weight when encoding the resumes and the job description. But since these are two kinds of very different documents, maybe would it make sense to actually have different encodings with different weights to encode each of them?
Yes, it was my first intuition. I had this intuition when I started, and then I didn't manage to learn the triplet network. Everything collapsed in one point. And I didn't manage, I could not manage to prevent this collapse to all embeddings collapsing to one point. Probably because these shared weights, because you are pushing and pulling the offers. And if the words are not shared, well, first guy is going to that way and the other guy is going that way, and they are not talking to each other. It's a bit my intuitive understanding of it. So my answer would be, probably if we manage to make it converge, it will be better, but I didn't.
How clean is your data in terms of word misspelling? And I think it's not very clean. And how do you handle it for the word embeddings?
It's not clean, and I don't really handle it. This is the provocative answer. What I do as a pre-processing for the fast text is just very simple pre-processing. I do uncase, so I remove the case, and some like very light pre-processing, but I keep everything as is. So with the misspellings and other stuff. It kind of works because the corpus is big and it somehow learns stuff, but it is a problem. But I think fixing this problem would be itself a whole machine learning project. So I chose not to do it. But just about this, we have another problem that CVs are parsed from PDFs. And the real problem we have in real life is that this parsing is far from perfect, and you have words that are stick together or very ugly things that are even uglier than the thing you mentioned. So,
thank you for your presentation. It was a really nice introduction to the problem and explanation of the triplet loss. Just a question about like triplet loss. It came to us, let's say, from face recognition, and there is like different other losses that was developed with the time. Why among all like central loss, arc phase, cause phase, and other losses, you choose this one, like in your pipeline?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. There is no specific reason other than it's very standard, and the project is quite young. So I tried the most standard option. And then I will think of all the things I can improve in the pipeline, and probably there is a lot of them because before the loss. This is why. But yeah, of course, it will be worth trying. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. It's very interesting. I wanted to know how do you deal with people who cheat in their CVs, like in the PDF when they add in like invisible character, not being too HEC, not proficient in C++, just in order to get past like the common filter.
So the answer, thank you for the question. The answer is same for as a colleague. I don't for now, of course. So yes, if there are cheaters in the room, and we put this in production, of course, the first thing you can think of is like, let's put white characters on white background and put that you did everything and you have everything. Yeah, it's a big problem. It can be a big problem.
It's a way of cheating. For some people, it's a way to alleviate some kind of savings you can face. Let's say you have like some snobbish companies who would like to hire only people coming from a specific background.
And you put so you just put the name of what they want. Yeah.
Some people do in order to bypass like the very frequent not known like filter that other company can have, you know. And I heard this especially for like finance school, like HEC and stuff like this. People do this in order to bypass the first filter. Yeah.
Well, I will make two answers. I think first one is we don't detect it right now. So this amounts to CV parsing. So first thing is like technically being able to parse it and to get this information. We don't have it right now. And second one, I'd say it's part of the bigger bias I told about is applicant bias. So yeah, I agree. it's a thing, yeah.
Maybe one last question, if there is any. Okay.
Just one more question about embeddings and how you store them. I saw that you are using some sort of database that index embeddings, but when there is new resume, like new CV that comes to your database, are you index it on the fly or you index like one time daily to do similarity search?
The model I presented right now is still R&D, so it's not in prod yet. What we want to do is to store it in a database like FACE or other embedding database that does approximate k-nearest neighbors nicely. And all our resumes and offers and job ads come into a Kafka. So we have a big Kafka bus. So then we can put a microservice that just takes mini batches of these events that come to the Kafka and process it kind of on the fly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and feel free to come talk to me after the talk. Thank you.
Ok, je vais chercher. Et donc maintenant, Jamie qui va nous parler de Camembert.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming so numerous today. Salut Damien and everyone here. So today I will present you the work that we've done within the Almanac team, which is an INRIA team specialized in NLP and digital humanities, about the release of the first BERT model for French. So the title is a bit, how can I say? It wants to be funny. I'm not sure it is. But the fact is, the hidden fact is that I wanted it to be called Casimir, like the old, you know, poupée géante jouet qu'on avait quand on était petit. But we decided to stick to something much more BERT-like. So this is mainly the work of Louis Martin, Benjamin Muller, and Pedro Javier Ortiz Suarez, and the rest of us. We helped to design the experiments, and we were basically providing advices and guiding the experiment. And Johan Dupoux, as a postdoc here, did all the NER experiments. So for those of you who don't know, who are we? So I just said it, we are a team within the INRIA. We are a bunch of computational linguists, computational scientists too, and we are doing like half natural language processing and half digital humanities, not the kind you can see on some website about transforming old books into novels or something like this, more like trying to decipher like missing parts of documents. All this kind of work, all the work in order to help build a digital library. So what do? We build linguistic resources that you may have used. How do you say à l'insu de ton plein gré en English? So that you may have used à l'insu de ton plein gré, like dataset for French parsing, like the French tree bank, the Sequoia tree bank, the crab bank, and the question bank as well. We also built lexicon, wide coverage lexicon, wide coverage grammars too, and we have the particularity, like many people, to release everything as open source. We strongly believe in sharing the stuff that have been produced by the public funding. So this is one of the many properties that we share with other teams, one and another. And I'd be happy to answer a question about this after the talk if you want. So we also have the specificity of working with many startups, with many companies and many universities via CIFRE thesis or collaboration project, or just sometimes you find someone you like and you work on something interesting. And we are really open to any collaboration, any cool ideas. So please come talk to us. Okay, so at first, I wanted to do a whole slide about like the NLP revolution and how BERT, Elmo, and all these models basically revolutionized the NLP as of today. But then I realized that you guys had two or three BERT talk already, and you must know about this as well. So I'll just go straight to the point. So BERT is, as Google said, the single most advanced they had to their research engine in the last 5 years. Okay, using BERT, using a contextualized language model, helped them to break with a huge hammer the performance ceilings they were having. Being like in machine translation, in research, on many applications, it was like a revolution. So what's the big secret about this? There is none. It's a conjunction of factors that turned out to work pretty well. So the whole idea is to train a language model, as you know, using two objectives. The first one is like mass word prediction. You just randomly select 15% or so of tokens, and you replace them by either a mask flag or by some other tokens. And initially, they also had a task of predicting whether the next sentence was a paraphrase of the current one. And it turned out that it was not that useful, and it got removed in the release made by for Roberta or Albert and so on. So it's based on a transformer architecture, which is, I think, one of the main differences with Elmo, which also was a huge how can I say that? Shock, which has a huge impact on NLP for 3 months, maybe 6 months before BERT. And I think this is really crazy if you think about it. Like in 2017 and 2018, we were all blown away by Elmo, and then 6 months later, we were all blown away by BERT, and then 6 months later, we were all blown away by GPT-2, and so on and so on. So it's a race, and they're winning it, I think. And so one of the characteristics I'd like you to keep in mind is that BERT, the original version, was trained on a corpus made of book corpus, so basically the concatenation of many books for 800 gigabytes, and from the huge English Wikipedia. So it was 2.5 billion of bytes or tokens, I don't remember. Anyway, so this was 1/4 of the whole corpus, and this was for the rest. And this is important in terms of uniformity of the current text. So it was such a huge revolution because the first results when BERT came out were amazing. They surprised everyone, managing to explode previous results by 7 to 7 points, by almost 5 points for this. And it was like, oh my God, what is happening here? So instantly, once people started to be able to work on it, the question was, how come it works so well? And this is the thing. The whole intuition was that BERT helps to understand. No, I will say it differently. BERT is able to use some knowledge it captures from the data it was trained on. And the question is exactly what kind of data, what BERT is learning, knowing that there is no supervision, besides the fact that, of course, you have like the word order and this function you want to optimize on. And so this whole question of trying to learn what BERT was learning became like a whole field in NLP called the BERTology. You can check it on Twitter. Sorry, I had a huge cold when I came here. It's like freezing outside, and I hope it won't be on the camera. So please cut it, especially if it leaks, you know. So when I say that everything happened so fast, it's really incredible. So basically, Elmo came out in the beginning, in March 2018. Okay, and I think the paper, if I'm not wrong, and BERT, like the archive paper, came out in September 2018, and the final paper was for NAACL the next year. Okay, and so we all started to work trying to understand what was happening. So there is here this whole line of work where people were trying to understand what BERT was learning, what kind of syntax it learned, what kind of semantics, and everything basically between 6 months. All of this, and all of those papers got published, and they all brought a piece to the how do you say edifice? Anyway, to the castle, to the castle. It's a bit, you know, like the metaphor of the blind people and the elephant. For some of those people, like when they touch it, it's a wall. When they touch the queue, it's a snake, and so on. It's a bit like this. Why? Because we don't have no one has all the resources to treat and process every aspect of BERT. For that paper, for example, that we got a short paper showing interesting stuff. I will present you like in 1 minute. It took us 4 months just to manage to build like the infrastructure, to manage to build the probing task, and to be able to understand what we are doing. And then you factor out the paper writing, and so we were able to describe one aspect of the result. Same for Hewitt et al. From Stanford. Same for all the paper from the Black Box NLP workshop. Do you know this workshop, people? It's a very interesting workshop. It's based by people working in cognitive science, in neurolinguistics, but all with a strong NLP side. And what they want to do is to understand what is there inside those deep learning models. Okay, and their whole principle was okay. Everyone can submit a paper as long as it's interesting, and it brings something to the knowledge. And it was like the most fascinating workshop I've seen like in 20 years. And it was at EMNLP 2018. It was also at ACL this year. And this year they added like a special track, Black Box NLP at ACL, because they want, how can I say? The big people behind this want people to work on how it works, on the understanding. Everyone is like fed up with this whole leaderboard chasing. They want to understand what is there behind. So if you are always looking at ICLR, NIPS, or ACL and NLP paper, have a look to those black box paper. Most of them are super interesting on one aspect, and they will help you to understand how what is happening behind the magic. Okay, so what does it capture? Long story short, syntax. Some form of syntax, sometimes some specific form of syntax, and to some extent, some semantics. So what we did was to use a set of problem tasks developed by Alexis Kono et al. In 2019, where the whole idea is to build some classifier that will be fine-tuned on BERT, and on which you'll be able to get some, how can I say, some evidence about what is happening. So it means that you need to build some tasks, some specific tasks that I will describe, and then you need to be able to interpret them. Also, we also use some clustering techniques in order to be able to see what was happening also behind the scene. So if you look at that sentence here, pardon. C'est quoi le bouton du laser? Ok, merci. If you look at that sentence... It's okay. Attends. J'essaie de pas casser votre matos. Okay. If you look at that sentence here, you can see that this is like a regular English sentence, which has been annotated in chunk. So the chunk is basically just the surface syntax of a sequence of words that we call the phrase. Okay, so here this is a noun phrase. Here will narrow is a verb phrase, and here this is also a verb phrase because there is only one token. So it's like the first layer of a syntactic analysis here, but we don't have any information on the relation between all of those. And so, so we calculated some representation for those phrases using the first and the last token of the chunk, and then using t-SNE representation, we're able to witness this marvel here. So you have here the list of the type of the syntactic chunk we have. And if you look at the layer 1 and the layer 2 of BERT, we can see that those are pretty much separated here. I'm very sorry, I'm still having that my... Pardon, je dois me moucher encore très fort. Mais j'ai plus de mouchoir, donc je vais essayer de l'intégrer. Je suis vraiment désolé. Je suis vraiment désolé. Donc here, we can see that, for example, the PP, so it means preposition. Merci beaucoup. It means the prepositional phrases here. So everything that starts by a preposition, I'm going to the cinema. So the chunk will be to the cinema. I'm having lunch at my mom's. At my mom's will be like also prepositional phrases. And this one here are very far away from this one, which are like the noun phrases. So the son of my grandfather, Joe the dog, and so on. Same here for everything which is not one of those. They are clearly well separated, and the same for the other. For the first layer, second layer, and then if you look at the upper layer, so here this is like the base model. So there are only 12 layers. Things are much more mixed. You cannot really say, okay, we can see like that the PP are really discriminated. Here, it's a mess. So what does it mean? It means simply that, sorry, I need to come back to this. it means only, and by only I mean wow, it means that the surface syntactic information are captured in the inferior layers, 1 to 3, 1 to 2. And then we don't know what is happening in the upper layer. So this is why we use here the probing task from Alexis Kono work. And basically he designed a set of features which can be split into 3 categories, like the surface features, syntactic features, and semantic features. So here you have stuff like sentenceless, word content. Here you have big gram shift, tree depth, how to predict like the depth of a tree. Here you have the more semantic one. For example, can you predict the tense of a verb? Can you predict what is the number of a subject? Is this singular? Is this plural? Same for an object. Can you, here a bit more interesting, can you remove the outlier out of a set of 5 words, for example? And then the whole idea is that if the prediction is correct, it means that this information is also correct. Okay, it's captured. And so how can we test this? By probing each layer with the same information, and at the end we see which layer guessed the best results. Okay, so this is so simple. Like this is like the best metrics. If you can explain it over a napkin, it means it's good, at least in the formally. So here you have a very boring table, but I will describe the result here. I will just tell you that the surface features are best captured within the 3 and 4 layers. The syntactic features themselves, they are captured between like the 6 and the 9 layers. And the semantic, it's a bit less visible here because we had some results on the large model, so it's much more visible. Okay, here you see that for the semantic features, they are much more captured, starting from 9 to 12. Of course, there is no strict separation, like the 10 is the tens and the 11 is something else. The thing is that we can see that the level and the amount of information captured, I would like to say the abstraction of the type of information which is captured, is not the same if you look at the layers independently. And interestingly, we have this kind of thing, which seriously blew my mind. It was the work made by my former student, Ganesh Jawahar. And the first time he came with that figure, I was like, oh my God. Because all my life, I've been drawing and trying to parse those things. And this is the kind of syntactic tree he was able to induce from the attention head number 11 in the second layer. So do you guys know what is it? Damien, toi tu sais. This is a dependency tree. You have relation between the key syntactico-semantic component of the sentence. And so it means that just at looking at how the attention head is moving, what are the links between them, you can induce a tree. And this is, it has been confirmed, of course, after. And this is the real revolution. Without any syntactic information, BERT is able to capture the stuff that are usually captured using strong supervision. And it was a real, like, jawbreaker here. So, excusez-moi encore une fois. Pardon, je suis en mode trompette. Donc, the point is that so far, all results were given for English, of course, because like the main model of BERT was done for English. All researchers worked on English. A couple of months or maybe weeks after the release of BERT, they released a model for Chinese. But we cannot have, I mean, us as non-Chinese speakers, we cannot have any intuition. So of course, the only play field we had was like English. So Pires and al. in 2019 came out with multilingual BERT. So maybe you guys are using it. Who use multilingual BERT? Cool, only one. And the others, no? Okay. So multilingual BERT, what is it? It's basically BERT trained on the concatenation of 100 languages, all different, like Spanish, French, Chinese, Arabic, Urdu, Hebrew, and things like this. And the first result, again, blown away everyone. Why? Because they showed that people were able to demonstrate an actual transfer happening between non-related languages. And I don't know if you've seen the paper of multilingual BERT. They have like very interesting result between Urdu, which is the language spoken in Pakistan, written in Arabic script, and another one which just evade me right now, probably Thai or something like this, something completely different. And they were able to display some transfer. So we all hallucinated on this, but still people who are working on multilingual BERT on French or Spanish started to notice something important. The improvement, the performance improvement of adding multilingual BERT into a regular NLP model were not as big as the one we could see using monolingual BERT. Okay, so the first intuition was, okay, maybe it's because of the size of the data, because on French, I don't think it's like, it was much more, maybe 200 million tokens, which doesn't look like so big actually on multilingual BERT compared to the 3 billion one for the initial. And so the question of trying to that we all wanted to answer was to know, okay, how come we cannot have the same performance using multilingual BERT versus monolingual BERT? So the obvious answer was, okay, let's try to build our own. And of course, we are not the only one doing this. Many people were also working on that. But the two questions that we in our team were asking was about the training data size. Is it all a matter of size and also a matter of variability? If you all know Wikipedia, and you probably have noticed that in Wikipedia, the texts are not colloquial. You don't have people who will say je sais pas trop ce qu'il a dit, j'ai envie de voir demain ce qu'il en ressort. Vous n'allez pas avoir d'argot. Vous n'allez pas du tout avoir. Sorry, I am in French. You won't have any slang. You won't have any direct discourse. You won't have tu. You won't have vous. Eventually, maybe in citation, but not in the text. So what does it mean? The variability, the variance of the text is not high. It's very homogeneous, and I have some interesting results about this. So this is the question. Besides, okay, we're happy we managed to train BERT. This is the one we wanted to answer here. So, as I said, there were no large monolingual models for anything about English besides English and Chinese. There was one for German and Chinese also, but they were trained on much less data than the initial BERT, and we were the first one to release an actual language model trained on a lot of data. And the thing is that maybe a couple of weeks after, maybe a month after, many other models came out of the, I was about to say closet, but came out of their offices one for French called Flaubert, developed by our friend of Paris 7 and the University of Grenoble. Bertia for Dutch, Finbert for Finnish, which is quite a nice achievement. Those are all very interesting papers if you want to have a look to see how they did it, but we all follow the same principle. So about the technical facts about BERT, I'm not sure that this is that interesting because you can all have them on the archive paper, but anyway. We have like 12 layers, 768 hidden dimensions, 12 rotation head, 110 million parameters, exactly like BERT base in English. We wanted to have the same parameters to be fully comparable. Whenever we had the choice between taking the default parameters or the default settings, we use the default settings the same as our English counterparts in order to be comparable. So we trained Camembert on the Oscar corpora, which is a collection of corpora extracted from Common Crawl. And okay, so I wasn't talking to the microphone. Okay, so they were all extracted from Common Crawl and subjected to a light preprocessing, like filtering the junk and using a language classifier in order to be able to have like distinct data set by language. So you can download them from the Oscar website. It's easy to find. You have the link on the Camembert webpage, and you have basically 128 or something like this languages, and 38 of those contain more than 4 gigabytes of text. So it means that you will be able to do stuff with this. So we use the same settings as Roberta. Okay, so only use the mass language modeling as pre-training objective, and using also subword embeddings from sentence subword tokenization, from sentence. So as every other language model, we can use it in 2 ways. So either as a pre-trained language model that we will use to fine-tune over a task, or as pre-trained embeddings. Okay, we will see that they both work fine. And we have 4 tasks: pattern speech tagging, dependency parsing, name entity recognition, and natural language inferences. So I have to say that our colleagues who released Flaubert did something much more clever than the thing we did. They created their own FLU. You all know GLUE, the GLUE benchmark. They basically created the same for French using a various set of data set. Some are the same than us, some are different, and which is a cool thing. It means that now we all have the same tools than in English. And a small parenthesis, you need to know that in the French academic circle for in NLP, one of the tasks that we are assigned to by our boss and direction is to help developing the NLP ecosystem. It means that people who use our stuff, being academics or like you, people working in the industry, we are supposed to help you use I was about to say product, our models, and be able to compare them. So building data sets that exist for English to French is one of our goals. And what they did, the Flaubert people, was really nice for this. It means that now, whenever you're going to sell your product to a customer or something, you have the means to say, okay, in English I have this, we have that, and we have the same kind of level of performance of French. And this is really important, I think. It's not nationalist, it's more about, how do you say, technological parity. You know, there is no reason that we don't have the same stuff, and we do now. So this is cool. So anyway, for the task that are using Camembert embeddings, usually they using embeddings from pre-trained models exhibits a small loss of performance. So the same here, as you will see, but this is something important if you want to use the embeddings with non-neural model in order to set up some baseline and things like this. So we also have like a fine-tuning way of using Camembert. So there is no special trick. I won't go into detail here. We just have a task. We fine-tune for each task one model using the default parameters or the same as in the original paper. Okay, this is we didn't want to optimize anything at this point. We wanted to know the raw performance of the model. So we have a set of I am late, no?
Yeah, 7 or 8 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to be to be a bit fast for the rest. So we have a couple of reasonable baseline, like we compared, of course, with MBERT. We compared with XLM, you know, like the massively multilingual language model released by Alexis Conneau, Guillaume Lampoul, and the people from Facebook. And we had a hard time comparing with them because they had every paper, they had a slight variation on the parameter setting. So this is why in some of the table, you have like a slight variant of XLM indicated with a subscript. Okay, this is because for a given task, we use the same XLM version that they were using. Okay, then there is UDFI. If you guys are working are following what is happening into the parsing section of NLP/AI. This is a genius work made by a lone master student in Czechoslovakia, in Republic Czech, sorry, in Czech Republic. He did something crazy. He took a huge data set of 120-something tree banks made by the Universal Dependency Consortium, and he concatenated them, and then he fine-tuned a parser using MBERT with the whole idea that using MBERT, it will be able to create some kind of magic interlingua, which it did. He actually managed to do it, being state of the art for like 6 months. He blown away everyone with this, and he was a lone master student with a video game GPU on his laptop. I'm not kidding, and he's focused. So this is like the baseline we have for parsing. And then, you have to admit that training, fine-tuning multilingual BERT on 100 tree banks on your laptop, I wouldn't do it, you know, and I'm sure you won't as well. This is very expensive. And I don't have a GPU on mine. So anyway, there is also another version of a classical parser, which I won't go into much detail, only to say that it uses MBERT and Flare embeddings mixed in a clever way and used as feature for a classic BLSTM parser. So nothing super fancy. For the data set, there is only one which is pretty new, I would like to say. It's a version of the French tree bank, which has been annotated in entity recognition. The work was done in 2012, published in the French conference and something else, but we never actually released it. For some reason, we stopped working on this. And now we cleaned the dataset and we made it usable by anyone who owns a license of that tree bank. So the tree bank of the French license, the license of the license of the French tree bank is free for academic and for research. And it comes with a small price for the company. So it's less than the Photoshop license for a year, for example. 8 000 euros, je crois. And negotiable if you show you're poor. So no, because I'm saying that because many times I've been asked by people I know from the industry, and it was so complicated for them to go through the hassle of actually paying the tree bank that they were willing to give me a check in order for me to give them. You know, but this money is used by the team of Anna Baye to actually maintain maintain it. And compared to the price of the pen tree bank, it's nothing. So anyway, and we use the XNLI French version for the natural language inference dataset. So maybe you know it. I won't go into details of it. So anyway, it's a dataset about how to do some inference. So you need to know that only the tests in the dev section have been manually translated from English to French, and the training data has been translated with Google Translation or the stuff they were using at Facebook back then. Okay, so it means that if you want to do natural language inference using this dataset, you'll be having a hard time because the quality of the training data is lame. Okay, it's almost over. So I'll go quickly. We have here some results for parsing and part of speech tagging. Long story short, we're state of the art, either using like the fine-tuning strategy, or using like Camembert as features for UDPipe on a specific dataset which is only made of spoken language. It's a transcription of discourse, so there is no punctuation, no capitalization, nothing, and this is hard to parse. Okay, so it works better for this. So I'll go quick for the rest. For the NER, non-entity recognition work, again, we show like that using Camembert leads to a 4-point improvement over the previous set of the art. And interestingly, using like the Camembert embeddings to the previous set of the art lead to very nice results. We don't know why. I'm not going to lie to you. We didn't have time to do proper analysis on this. We had too many results, but we're working on it right now. There is something worth noting for the NLI results. We got good results compared to the state of the art. Camembert is like 82% of accuracy, while the previously disclosed result by Kono et al. Showed that they got 85.2, but they used the large version of the model. So of course, we decided just to check whether there was something wrong, how it will work using like a large version of Camembert, so which is not on the paper on arXiv. This is something we have submitted recently to a conference. And then, of course, we had very good results using, but this is not a surprise. You just multiply the number of layers, the number of attention heads, and of course, it works better here. So what do we want to know now? Okay, so having like the SOTA results for a language like French is not important beside our small community. I mean, it's important for us, but not that much. We want to really understand what the story is behind all this. So something I haven't said yet is that we had 2 training data sets actually. There is the OSCAR corpora, which are basically an extraction, a straight extraction from Common Crawl, and the CCNet corpora, which were made available by Facebook. And at Facebook, they did something clever. They trained the language model on Wikipedia and selected the text from Common Crawl that will look like the most to Wikipedia. So it means that even though it comes from the same source, a priori, the data from CCNet is supposed to be cleaner than the one we have, but probably with less variability, as I said. If you select from text without any tu or vous, you won't have any tu or vous from the rest. And so this is one aspect. The other aspect is that we wanted to know what level of data, what amount of data was necessary in order to have good performance. And so we trained Camembert models on 4 gigabytes of text, meaning basically 30 times less. Ouais, 30 times less than the regular Camembert models. And Tintin, the results are almost the same, which is like a big surprise. So in order to be sure about what we were saying, we also sampled 4 gigabytes of text from Wikipedia, 4 gigabytes of text from OSCAR, and 4 gigabytes of text from CCNet, okay? And then we trained the same, some small Camembert on this using the exact same other parameters. And what can you see? Like the result, first of all, the result between CCNet and OSCAR are always very close for all tasks like part of speech tagging, dependency parsing. They start to differ for the NLI task, but I'll come back to this in a minute. So, is there something special to say here? No. The same tendency is shown for the use of Camembert as embeddings. So okay, it's at least we are consistent. And so what does it mean? We don't need to train a BERT model on 150 whatever gigabyte of text. Only 4. And what seems to matter, because there is a huge gap of performance between Wikipedia text and the text from command crawl. So if you don't know command crawl is like everything you can get for free from the web, from crappy web blog à la Skyrock blog to interesting medical blog. So the variability is much more important. And so what does it mean? You can have all you want on Wikipedia. You won't learn enough new stuff to be interesting. So this is like the first take-home message. Then there is something else which is interesting, is that I don't know if you read the paper or if you know about this, but in order to train Camembert, we had to do do it using 100,000 steps. Okay, so here you have there is a graph showing first here the perplexity, which of course keeps decreasing as long as the number of steps increase, while the rest is pretty flat, no? Like part of speech parsing and NER, you basically got the best result, like the top result, around 30,000 steps, one third. For the NLI stuff, it's less clear. It seems to me that it keeps increasing, but that probably is something we should try over like much more analysis. So the whole idea is like to maybe, this is an intuition not proved yet, this is an intuition, that the information coming from the low-level structures, part of speech tagging, dependency parsing, and so on, are captured early in the process. If you want more semantic inferences, for example, you need more. You need to train longer, and you need maybe eventually more data, because this is the only task where it makes sense. And this is also one of the differences between CCNet and OSCAR. The size of the sentences of the document captured by CCNet are much longer than the one we have in OSCAR. So it means that if you're doing semantic inference, having like a bigger text, larger text, makes sense in terms of what you can grasp. It's like having, for example, only random tweets, 100 billion tweets in a random order without any thread, trying to do some kind of inference, versus doing the same, but on text, on actual text from Reddit. And on Reddit, you'll have much more information, much more threaded structures, and you'll get better results. And guess what? GPT-2 was trained on Reddit, not random Wikipedia, because the text where they actually they use to actually train the model matters a lot. One last slide, and it's over. Okay, so this is only if you want to have more details about comparing the performance if you use subword masking or whole word masking. If we comparing like CCNet and OSCAR, performance are the same except for the XNLI task. As I said, I think it's because of the nature of the text itself, not of the model. And for the step, we did some experiment with 500,000 steps, so five times more using Camembert. And as you can see, it doesn't really help for the low-level task, but it does for XNLI. So it really means that the semantic information that is targeted by this task is captured with a longer training. And this is an interesting dichotomy, because sometimes you want to use BERT or similar models for tasks like parsing, pattern speech tagging, or whatever. It means you don't need as much data. But if you want to do like more semantic inference, yes, in that case, maybe you need like to throw out the whole arsenal. I haven't talked about the amount of CPU. Non, ça y est, c'est fini. J'avais fini. So I was about to say that I didn't put a slide about like the computing power we use, but it's awful. Basically, a BERT model was trained on one day on 256 GPUs with 32 gigabytes of RAM. So this is why being able to use less steps, less text, and eventually less memory is super important. Because I don't believe in one model to rule them all. I think that for people working in the legal tech or the financial tech, they have much less data, and they probably need to do the same. So this is the people who did it, like Louis Martin, Benjamin Muller, et Pedro Ortiz Suarez. Merci de votre attention.
We'll try to finish at 30. So is there just 1 or 2 questions before the pizzas?
Service pizza. Merci.
Merci Jamé pour ton talk. Je fais les questions en français ou je dois les
Vas-y,
faire
fais en français, fais en français.
Ok.
Pardon.
Ah zut, j'aurais pu parler anglais. J'avais 2 petites questions. La première, c'est sur les performances. Tu montres bien qu'il y a un modèle qui est plus petit et qui est quand même meilleur que. Donc, on n'a pas forcément les meilleurs perfs avec les gros modèles.
Ouais.
Tu parlais de variété. Je me suis demandé si ce n'était pas aussi une question de qualité, dans le sens où ce que tu disais, c'est que le CCNet, il est filtré. Et donc, est-ce que c'est pas plutôt sur la qualité du test que sur la variété ou
C'est une super bonne question. En fait, on est en train de bosser sur ça. On est en train de faire des tests pour ajouter du bruit dans les données pour voir justement à quel niveau de bruit ou de variété, etc., ça impacte. Parce que on n'a pas les moyens d'aller inspecter 138 gigas de texte ou le texte sélectionné par CCNet ou les autres. Nous, ce qu'on a pu voir en faisant des stats sur les longueurs de phrases, c'est que c'était plus long. Et par exemple, on n'a pas fait de métrique de bruit en comparant par rapport au FTB ou à Wikipédia, les choses qu'on aurait dû faire. Mais ça prend super. Si tu veux, le moindre grep sur Oscar ou CCNet, ça prend 3 heures sur un cluster de 20 machines, tu vois. Donc ça, c'est dur à faire. Mais oui, non, c'est effectivement une vraie question. Tu vois, c'est d'où ça vient, est-ce que c'est le bruit, pas le bruit et tout. Mais les résultats sont pas si flagrants en termes de le modèle à 138 Go, il est meilleur. Le truc, c'est que celui à 4 Go, il n'est pas si naze. Il est un tout petit pouillem en dessous et à mon avis, il est good enough.
Mais parfois, il est meilleur sur certaines tâches, non?
Je sais pas. Ouais, disons
c'est
que
tes résultats en même temps.
Là, pour l'instant, tu vois, il y a
sur les dernières NLI, etc., on voit bien qu'il est à 82 sur le CCNet à 4 Go.
Il est à 82% le CCNet ici. Et donc, par rapport à Oscar 4 gigabits, il est à 80-88 ici. Donc là, la différence entre le premier et le second, elle n'est quand même pas si élevée. Par contre, par rapport à Oscar 138 gigabits, là, je t'avoue que nous aussi, on s'est posé la question de pourquoi il y avait un tel gap. Et en fait, à un moment donné, il y a tellement de paramètres qui rentrent en jeu. Je veux dire, on n'est pas à l'abri d'un bug, d'une erreur ou d'une connerie au moment de l'évaluation. Et là-dessus, c'est tellement un outlier que, à mon avis, là, je pense que, bon, ok, les gars, si jamais on est pris, il faut qu'on fasse l'expérience vite fait. On n'a pas le droit de toucher au texte d'archive, mais ça, c'est les trucs qui sont sur to-do list. Vérifier les outliers, clairement.
Ok, merci. Et j'avais une autre question beaucoup moins pointue et plus ouverte. Si on veut utiliser Camembert pour calculer des représentations sur les phrases, est-ce que tu as un conseil à donner? Est-ce que tu vois comment est-ce qu'on pourrait faire?
Nous, on l'a fait. Donc, ils l'ont fait. Donc, ils ont utilisé une métrique super Sioux en grosso modo, je ne vais pas dire des conneries, en averageant les premières parties de chaque subword pour avoir à la fin une espèce de mix qui retient le truc. Donc, c'est grosso modo comme on a fait pour les autres tâches. Tu vois, tu prends juste une fonction, ça peut être un average, ça peut être un produit, ça peut être une somme, qui va juste récupérer tous les mini-embeddings pour avoir une phrase.
Merci beaucoup. Si vous avez d'autres questions, je vous invite à aller parler à Jamé pendant l'apéro.
Je suis désolé d'avoir été si long.
Merci encore, Job Teaser. Et du coup, il y a un apéro qui nous attend derrière. Merci.
Désolé, moi, je ne jamais plus pour mettre du temps que ça fait.